And so Senator Chamberlain, talk to us a little bit from your perspective and your constituents' perspective in terms of the metro suburbs. What are their priorities for transportation, and is that perspective part of this discussion? Where are you personally at in terms of, do you agree even that we need $600 million a year for several years to solve our state's transportation issues? Kind of what's your perspective and your constituents' perspective?
Okay, three pieces. One, I think it's important that we all remember these conversations with this backdrop. This context is that, getting off here for 30 seconds, state spending's increased almost 74% since 2000. We're the top 5th tax state, top 5 tax states in the country already. Our burdens in the metro area, aside from business property tax, are also these extra transit taxes, plus on top of that, fiscal disparities. HHS is growing at 12 to 18% a year. That's projected next. We have, matter of fact, the budget went from 34 in 11-12, 34.5 is going to be 44 the next biennium when we come back in January. So we have that. We have the tax system, HHS growing. Don't forget the increased burdens and responsibilities we are going to have to retiring baby boomers across this state. It's going to be a massive demographic shift come 2020. And some of you are seeing that already in your businesses, trying to keep people, trying to find new people. So that's the context. Now, we have priorities. The gentleman down here, a representative, mentioned priorities. It is a priority issue. When I'm talking to folks in the rural areas, suburban areas, believe me, all they're complaining about is road construction. And the second thing is that one or two people here or there think the trains are fine. But the fact of the matter is most people do not live and work in those two cities. And most people don't want to live and work in those two cities. If they want to, that's wonderful. Nothing against the two cities. But the constituents I represent, a lot of suburban people, don't live or work in those cities. They go there for some entertainment. So therefore, they're not supporting light rail transit. So I think it has to be kept in context. Priorities, costs, tax burdens that are existing, future issues we're going to face, and how all this stuff gets pushed out when you say by two last things. Rural County Caucus put this together. The total dedicated funds for roads, bridges, has been increasing. And it was over $2 billion this year. So that's $2 billion a year. It has been increasing, not by leaps and bounds, but it has been increasing. That can be supplemented with some extra bonding, with reallocations of some taxes. So the last question is, do we need $600 million a year? Yeah, I don't think that's a problem. We can find it when we don't have to increase taxes. So I wouldn't support increasing taxes. We have a lot of money in the system. The money's still growing. We had to prioritize things and reallocate what we have, and that's a smart, permanent, sustainable way to do this. These trains are hugely expensive. To bring money in, to build them is one thing. We're subsidizing the North Star corridor, that rail, by about $18 million a year. That's $48 a passenger. They try to get more people on that train, and they don't want to ride it. So there's a lot of pieces of this. It's complicated, but we have to think about priorities, total costs, and how this all fits in context. That's longer than I. Sorry.
Fair enough. Now, Mr. Graves, and then we're going to dig into some of these specifically, if you want to grab the microphone there. I think when we had the transportation discussion during the Pawlenty years, and the House and the Senate overrode Governor Pawlenty's veto of the most recent gas tax, it seemed that the chamber played a pretty key role in pushing that rock kind of over the hill. I think now, everybody talks about we need transportation, we certainly need it to grow our economy. What is the chamber's kind of position on where should the money come from? Do we need the kind of money that we're talking about? We'll start with those two questions.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me to be a part of this panel. I certainly feel privileged to be up here with these these legislators, and just appreciate the opportunity to give you our perspective. To the first question, we have advocated for additional investment in our transportation system. As you mentioned, the Chamber's been actively involved in this discussion and this debate for a number of years, going back to 2006 with the constitutional dedication of the motor vehicle sales tax, 2008 with the last big transportation funding bill, and then in recent years as well. I would say there are, at least from the perspective of our members, there are some differences between now and say 2008. In 2008, the state hadn't increased the fuel tax in 20 years, and it was at a time when the need for dollars was acute, and that's something that we heard very clearly and consistently from our members. I would say, we're in a little bit different situation now where, the last kind of phase into the fuel tax ended in 2012. And then in 2013, a vast majority of our members saw significant increases in other parts of the tax code affecting their ability to grow, to expand, and stay competitive. And so, as this debate was heating up again, we went to them and said, this debate is coming. Traditionally we've been a part of this conversation because of the importance of transportation to the business community. What is your view about how we approach this conversation? And said, yeah, transportation is important to me. It's important to my business. It's important for me to get my goods to market and my customers and my employees to my door. But at this point, after 2013, I'm paying a lot in taxes as it is now, and it's my expectation that some of those tax dollars be used and invested in things that are particularly important to me in my business, things like transportation. This also was kind of against the backdrop of a significant budget surplus, and so our members said, now is the time to start to think differently about how we fund transportation, to broaden the base of financial support for our system, not to do away with the kind of the constitutionally dedicated backbone that's there of the fuel tax and the motor vehicle sales tax and tap fees, but to look at what the additional need was, and to look at the resources that are coming into the general fund that have some relation to transportation, things like the sales tax on auto parts and rental cars, and use those dollars to help augment the resources that are already coming in. So our view is that those resources should be used for transportation. They ought to be augmented by the state's bonding, both general fund bonding for local roads and bridges, trunk highway bonding for the state's roads and bridges. And then when it comes to transit, we believe that transit is important both in greater Minnesota and in the metro area, knowing obviously that the discussion as mentioned earlier about transit in the metro area tends to be much more difficult politically. Our view has been that the build out of the metro area transit system ought to be paid for with metro funding sources, and we have not been prescriptive about what that ought to be because we've just tried to spend our time and effort and energy articulating the need to make sure that transit is a robust piece of that package.
All right, so I got lots of questions here. I'm going to start with Senator Dibble, I think. In that the case has been made one way or another here from several of your colleagues as well as the Chamber that we have enough resources within our current collection system that if we move some things around, we can meet our needs. What's your response to that?
Well, I would disagree, unless, of course, you're willing to make fairly substantial and dramatic cuts to kind of the core services that come out of the general fund, whether that's K-12 education or healthcare. There's some citation about the growth in the state's budget being a certain percentage. We hear that figure quite a bit, and that, of course, fails to reflect and factor in, of course, just normal inflation, fails to factor in the fact that the state has taken over significant portions of funding and responsibility for K-12 education, corrections, courts, and some other services that were previously funded through the local property tax. Locally, and of course there's the continuing local-state partnership. So if you want to take an accurate measure of whether or not what we raise in terms of resources and what we spend is appropriate or pegged correctly, it's important to take a look at the price of government, the per capita spending, and how that's changed over time, over a long period of time. And that's held steady or declined to a large degree. Another more accurate measure is whether or not the resources that we're raising are done fairly and equitably across economic income differences. And I think that's improved in recent years. Take a look at our economic growth and productivity and output. That, of course, we do have a high service state, but it's also a highly productive state because we invest in education and infrastructure, human capital, quality of life, and that sort of thing. And so we're cited as one of the very best places to do business in the country. And of course, we also need to recognize that our population is growing, and that there are always more kids that go to school every year, and more people are getting older, and more demands in terms of long-term care and other sorts of health care that are supported somewhat publicly. So if you want to make dramatic cuts to the general fund that serve those basic investments, sure, we can do that. We can prioritize that for transportation. I don't think there is the appetite in either party to make that level and that dramatic and those drastic of cuts. And if you take a look at, for example, the gas tax and why the gas tax doesn't do what it used to do. It doesn't do what it used to do for a couple of key reasons. One is, of course, that we levy the gas tax on a per gallon basis. So not on a, we don't peg the gas tax the way we do income tax or property tax or sales tax. That it's responsive to growth in price, growth in value, those sorts of things. So remains fairly static, and it shrinks relative to the per gallon basis. If cars are running more fuel efficiently, people are driving less, et cetera. And it loses ground to inflation very, very quickly, particularly against construction indexed inflation. And so the gas tax purchases a fraction of what it purchased back. We raised it a little bit in 2008, but now we have to go back fully almost 30 years to look at the more recent significant increase in the gas tax. The other thing we also cannot lose sight of in this conversation, and I know there are a lot of local elected officials, is just talking about the highway user fund is not a thorough conversation. We also need to talk about if we're going to reinvigorate the state-local partnership and figure out how to work with local units of government for something like 90% of the mileage that are under control and ownership of cities and counties and townships. And the Senate package and the House package had some ideas about how to raise those dollars at the state level to take some of the intense pressure that there is on local government aid and property taxes to support that mileage as well.
Representative Petersburg, I want to go to you now. And Senator Dibble raises a critique of basically the House plan that has been raised throughout the process, is that the general fund dollars certainly may not be there in the future as cycles go up and down, that even in the short term, you may have to make significant reductions to other parts of the state budget. Why is that not true?
Well, I think one of the things that we fail to realize is that for all the things that we want, the state will never have enough money. For the things that we want to do, it's just never going to be there. The question always has to be, well, what is the revenue sources? What is the level of taxation that we want to put on our constituents? And how do we prioritize to live within that? As just something for us to think about. How many here know what the tax rate is for gasoline using the federal and state gas tax as the price today? I would bet most of you don't realize that we're paying a higher tax rate on that gasoline than we are for our salaries, for what we get out of our paycheck. Most of us are in that 20 to 25% bracket for our Social Security, Medicare, state, and federal tax. At the current price, at 201, which I drove by now, you subtract 46.9%, it's about 47 cents. From that, and you divide that by 47 cents, you'll see that we're almost at 30% is the tax rate for gasoline. That seems to be plenty heavy. And to realize that 2 years ago, in the previous session, biennium, there was a gas tax increase presented. Actually, Senator Dibble presented it in his package. Chair Hornstein had it in his and pulled it out at the last minute. But that was unable to get passed even then, knowing that we needed it. Primarily because it's a very regressive tax. It hits those that can't afford it more than others. For those of us around this room, a 15-cent or 20-cent gas tax increase probably isn't going to hurt us an awful lot. But in greater Minnesota especially, when there is no option for transit or other things that's very economical or easy to use, we all do drive, and it impacts them greatly. So when we start thinking about how we pull apart certain aspects of transportation and say, well, this we want to be provided by those that drive cars and trucks fully 100% through gasoline tax and constitution dedicated taxes, and that's the only thing that we're going to use for it. And then when we talk about transit and say, well, 25 to 35% of the cost of running it can be borne by those that ride on it. The rest of it has to come out of the general either sales tax or property taxes, and that's okay. But those that drive cars have to pay for the whole thing, even though, and this is something that I think we also don't remember, is that transportation, especially roads and bridges, impacts every man, woman, and child from the day they're born till the day they die, whether they drive a car or not. We have our public safety needs roads and bridges, all of the commerce and supplies that we get to our cities and others come across those roads and bridges. It impacts all of us. And so therefore it is important, and I think it's a reality that we need to be thinking about how all of us as a whole are also putting dollars into that system. As something that hasn't been mentioned is even transit gets 40% of our sales tax on our vehicles. It goes into transit. And about half of the motor vehicle lease tax goes into Greater Minnesota Transit. So we are supporting that as well. And for local counties and townships, almost 100% of their dollars comes from property tax. So we have a big mix of this. And one last thing to remember is that, remember 100 years ago, we had virtually no roads at all. There were cartways and we had horse and buggy. And since then, we built up the road structure that we have, understanding that each of those roads has really got about a 50-year life expectancy. As we've expanded that, we've expanded what we need to be able to do, and we need to start looking at how we invest for that because it is a big infrastructure. Those are all challenges that we need to be looking at, but if we don't start prioritizing our infrastructure as just as important at health and human services and education, which are the three primary responsibilities of the state, and just always put it under the rug and saying, well, it's self-funded and it's self-dedicated, and so therefore we don't need to do anything, we're always going to be short and behind the eight ball.
So where does, I guess maybe though my question is, and if you could zero in on the actual critique of, okay, if you're going to reprioritize within the state budget and move transportation, roads and bridges, from your perspective, to a higher priority, what's moving down on that scale if there are not new resources? Even one or two ideas of what would you say, well, we can back away from funding on X?
Well, that's really hypothetical, and it's really not appropriate. We started the year with looking at, we were going to fund infrastructure and roads and bridges to the tune of about $600 million. At that time, we had a $2 billion surplus in which we were going to use part of that to offset the sales tax on parts, auto parts, and other things, or batteries, etc., that most people thought was going to roads and bridges anyway, and was going to offset the cost of that with the surplus that then within a couple of years would then have been washed away and kind of built into the system. And so right now, without knowing exactly how much dollars we're going to have to be looking at, 100, 200 million, etc., out of a $42 billion biennial budget, I think is something that is easy to do. And when we have other deficits and other things, for some reason we find that ability to do so. So until we have more specifics, it's difficult to give you specifics as to where you would come with. But everything has to be on the plate. Everything has to be on the negotiating side. And one of the reasons why it's difficult is because everybody has their pet projects.
All right, Representative Johnson, you said you'd be open to a little bit of general fund money going into transportation. Are you thinking sort of take it out of the surplus on a one-time basis or some sort of ongoing funding? How much is too much? Where does our current general fund money play into this?
I was willing to do that in this last biennium because I thought with the Republicans held the House and DFL held the Senate and the governor's seat, that there was really kind of an opportunity because transportation is obviously a complex, funding transportation is complex. It absolutely needs long-term funding. And so to achieve that, we would have to have agreement during this last session amongst the two bodies in the legislature and the governor. And so I thought accepting the House position with respect to the auto part sales tax to statutorily dedicate that funding, I thought that was I said that in deference to my colleagues and my GOP colleagues in the House. What I was hoping to get was a response that they would discuss then openly the possibility of increasing the gas tax. And that was, if you followed it, you know that just didn't happen. I did that very reluctantly because I do think it puts pressure on the general fund. There's been a lot of discussion this afternoon about LGA. And you go back 15 years, that's about 15 years ago is when it was cut. And remember, 10 of the last 15 years, the state has had a deficit. How do we fund these roads if we're facing a deficit? And so LGA is a vulnerable fund. But I think we saw it in this session. There were two areas that I found, partly because of my district, but I thought for the state of Minnesota, where we came up short about $50 million. We couldn't find the $50 million we needed to pay for a shortfall in Minsk. Reverland Community College is going to take it on the chin because of that, as is Minnesota State University of Mankato. A lot of the places that we depend in rural Minnesota to prepare the people, help grow our economies and fill our communities, there will be less opportunities. And then another example where we came up about $25 million short was at the Security Hospital in St. Peter, where there's very severe safety issues. We needed more staff, everybody acknowledged that, but we couldn't get the money. So we already saw the pressure on that. When you put pressure, is that the pressure to use cash for roads, even in this session, did that hold down what we could do for LGA, et cetera, et cetera? So I think that's the problem with it. But I also think, and I'm comfortable in the world of compromise, but the compromise has to be, if I'm going to give something and work off that principle of saying that general fund money is very important to my schools, healthcare, et cetera, I'm willing to do that. I think it's also fair to ask the other side to say, we can look at an increase on the gas tax, which is the workhorse for funding roads in the state.
Mr. Graves, a short answer, but is there any scenario under which the Chamber of Commerce could support new revenue for transportation?
Well, I think what we saw towards the end of session, speaking of the compromise, of movement of the conference committee between Senator Dibble and Chair Kelly, Chair Dibble and Kelly, of a kind of compromise approach, using some dedicated, constitution dedicated dollars through, for instance, changes in TAP fees, matched up with the funding from the general fund. Something that we were, I think, open to. It's not something that we were out there preferably pushing for throughout the session, but we too realized that given some of these concerns about the long-term, I guess, viability of use of the general fund, that there may need to be some dedicated sources involved there, and I think in our view, that conversation seemed to be getting fairly ripe towards the end of session, but never got quite ripe enough to get a compromise over the finish line. So I think that's certainly an example of some movement in the discussion that I think potentially could have paved the way for a bill in the end, but I guess came up short.
All right, that's a priority. If we are going to pay for Southwest Light Rail, is it, as I think Mr. Graves suggested, most appropriately done out of some sort of local metro scenario, or should the rest of the state be asked to contribute? And then we'll go on down the line. I could probably guess your answer, but I want you to articulate it.
Maybe all them want to pay, I'll pay for it. Well, first, again, smart and sustainable. There is a fallacy going on here, folks, that either we raise taxes or we collapse as a state. That is a fallacy. Mutual exclusivity, either or, pick one. It's not a case where we either raise taxes and we fail. That's not the case. And secondly, I want to keep repeating this. Senator Dibble raised a good point. Our budget has increased outstripping inflation, population growth combined, and far exceeding median household income growth. So even given some of the other anomalies and things that Senator Dibble mentioned, it has been taken into account. It has far outstripped all of those things, even when you combine them and build them in. As far as transit, I'm not anti-transit. My constituents are not anti-transit. But again, either we build light rail and subsidize it $2.50 to $3 for every dollar in the fare box and squeeze money out of the general fund and out of transportation dollars, or we don't do anything. Well, I disagree with that. When you raise a tax to raise revenue to support transit, that's an opportunity cost, right? In a way, you're taking money from there to put it into an expensive train that few people will ride because they don't live and work in those two cities. So smart, sustainable, creative ways to do this. Why can't we sit down and start talking about how in the metro area can we create a transit system of buses to get people, say, from Maple Grove to Lino Lakes, or vice versa? Is there a way to do that? Is there some plausible way to do that? Instead of building a big $2 billion train from Southwest up north to Minneapolis. And it'll be about $2 billion, not including the debt service, which is also, I think, the second fastest growing part of our budget. So there are ways to get there. There are smart ways to get there. I just ask people to be creative, innovative, and not just say it's either this or nothing. It's either this or we fail. It's not the same. Did I answer your question?
Well, it was, I think I mean, I didn't expect that you would have an enthusiastic response to how we're going to pay for Southwest Light Rail.
Right.
My guess is you would say your constituents don't want to pay for it.
For Southwest Light Rail specifically,
Yeah.
no. This is a $2 billion project, 10 or 15% or whatever capital cost will come from the state, and then the rest from other sources. And then it has to be sustained by the state taxpayers and the county taxpayers and the metro taxpayers. And again, dollars that don't go, that are being sucked out of our pockets to support that, are dollars that don't go other places, or potentially other places. This constitutional amendment, as Senator Dibble knows this better than I, it's a 60-40, maximum of 60% for roads, correct, on that one? And then it can be no less than 40% for transit. So we can be creative, we can come up with ways to do that, but I would say no to Southwest Light Rail because it's expensive, the debt service can be huge, the operating costs ongoing are huge. There are other ways to do this without burdening Minnesota, because we have to think about the future. There are other things at play, and we can manage this, we can do it, I'm positive we can. We can't do it if we ignore the enormous cost, the enormous rate the government is growing. One last piece, and I'll be quiet. Taxes, right? So everybody drives, right? We go to the grocery store, we get a Pop-Tart and a Twinkies and our milk, right? So those Pop-Tarts, Twinkies, and milk come to the store on a what? Okay, trucks run on roads, and they also burn. And if they're burning gasoline and they're buying it, they're paying more taxes, right? So I pay another 20 cents for whatever I'm buying, say it's per gallon. They are going to pay it. That cost is built into everything. So this is not, folks, right? You all know this in business. This is not a single issue thing. It's not a one-time hit. We're going to pay it, and then we're going to pay it again when we go to the store with all those built-in costs along the way. So no to Southwest Light Rail.
Gotcha. All right, Senator Dibble, you've made the case for rail and transit generally, so we don't need to do that.
Well, I got another 20 minutes to lay on you.
but what I want to know is, and I think, because it does, I think for our group, sort of help us frame how we think about this and what it means for, why the bonding bill fails or doesn't fail or that sort of thing, is so if we are going to move forward with Southwest Light Rail, I mean, is it a metro solution in terms of a sales tax or some other revenue?
Well, I'll answer the question in two ways. First of all, I disagree with everything that's basically my 20 minutes. I think it's dead 180 degrees wrong. But I'll answer in two ways. One is as a matter of principle, and a little bit as a matter of policy and even politics, I think that major transit investments in the metropolitan area should be shared to some degree on a statewide basis. So the 10% capital cost, for example, to build Southwest LRT, is at present identified as a state share. So 40% comes from locally, as in metropolitan area, generated sources, and then the remainder, 50%, comes from the federal government. That said, I am, and the reason I say that, of course, is that my earlier discussion about transit, transit is the major form of economic development, access to jobs and other opportunities, mobility that would support the aspirations, ambitions, the development of the metropolitan area, much like Highway 14, Highway 23, et cetera, in this part of the state. And so it serves a larger state's interest. There is a state policy and political interest in supporting transit in the metropolitan area. That said, the bill that we passed in the Senate now 3 times in the past few years, would remove the state at large from picking up any responsibility for building and operating transit. It would be entirely a metropolitan concern. And that's something that I think folks in greater Minnesota maybe should be happy about. I do know that we have to link that idea up with supporting additional resources for supporting replacing, rehabbing, and doing safety and capacity improvements to our larger roadway system, both the state-owned system and the locally owned system. So I understand the pragmatics of the practicality of getting the metropolitan-only system in place. But if we were able to pass that comprehensive package, there are several benefits to greater Minnesota. One is we pay for transit in the metropolitan area entirely. So the rest of the state is completely out of the deal and off the hook. So no resources flow from greater Minnesota to support major mobility, major economic development investments in our public infrastructure in the metro area, A. B, we connect that with a larger transportation package. More resources, of course, are flowing through the highways. We're putting more resources on the table, flowing through the highway user tax distribution fund. Hopefully we're also creating some sources that support local roads as well. So just through the formula, more resources are flowing. And then something that maybe everyone should remember is that the county state aid highway funding formula greatly subsidizes greater Minnesota county highways from the metropolitan area. So this argument about I'm never going to ride Southwest LRT, I'm never going to, we only deliver goods and services on roads, et cetera, ignores a couple of things. The benefit to me, and I'm not complaining about the fact that my dollars subsidize to the tune of tens of millions of dollars the county state aid highway program. That's a good thing, even though I'm not going to drive ever in my entire life on some of these county state aid highways. I think it's good that we support really good roads all around Minnesota. So I don't begrudge the formula. Frankly, the metropolitan area generates a lot of economic activity, and a lot of that flows in many, many different ways throughout the state budget to greater Minnesota. That's a good thing. And secondly, we are invested in making sure that people can get to the things they need to get to so that they can have successful lives if driving a car maybe not be an option for them. Think how important it is both for people in their own lives to be able to live in their homes for as long as possible. How much better that is for the community, how much better that is for the businesses in that community if folks have transportation options, if they're able to, they're not forced into a long-term care facility somewhere else sooner. Think about how much better we all are off when young people can get to school more efficiently, more effectively. Think about how much better off we are when people can combine their trips into a single trip and create more efficiencies and more time to pursue other things other than just driving around in congestion. So thinking about how things that don't directly impact our lives still benefit us in direct and indirect ways. In Minneapolis, we have these levy referendum. Very, very few households actually have kids in the schools. They support our school levy referendum renewals by overwhelming numbers because they understand that we need to have strongly supported schools in Minneapolis, even though we might not have a kid in our own household.
So Representative Peterson for Berg, I want to go to you because I think this issue of metro resources for Metro Transit that Senator Dibble talked about, kind of I think one of the head scratchers for some of us is if this is a load that some in the metro area are willing to carry on their own behalf, certainly from the House GOP caucus position, but then also as a rural legislator, maybe more importantly, because you're just thinking about your piece of this and the folks that you represent, why wouldn't we simply let the metro area determine a system to pay, find their own resources to pay for something like Southwest Light Rail Transit, if it means advancing an overall deal on transportation or the bonding bill or whatever it ends up being that it gets tied into?
I think you do raise a great point. It seems like on the surface, that's what we're talking about, giving local control. However, one of the things that we've been talking about over the years is whether or not Met Council needs to have some reform in itself. So just as an example, I asked when Met Council was in front of our committee, I said, so we know that fare box recovery is somewhere between 25 and 35% of the cost. I said, when was the last time fares were raised? And he said 2008. 2008, that's 8 years with the same cost and same fare box. And I know the cost has increased since then. And then furthermore, a question was asked, well, can't we at least have a goal to try to increase that fare box? And the overwhelming response from both them as well as the DFL side was, but then people stop riding the transit. Well, so then the question becomes, so is the transit that we're doing right now, is that the importance of people really needing it, or is it something that's a convenience for them at a cost that they don't want to provide? I know that if the state was willing to subsidize my transportation by car to do the same tune, I'd be happy with that. So for me, the other issue of the Met Council is that the Met Council has the authority to bond and set levies on the taxpayers of Minneapolis-St. Paul. So that becomes now a statewide issue for me because that's authority. And yet they're appointed by the governor, and there's nothing in statute that says they have to be tied to any kind of election to be on the Met Council, meaning they can assign taxes and levy to the community around them. And we were working on trying to get some of that improved, and I think we will. It's just that I think we need to have some of those things resolved first before we can turn it over to the Met Council or to the CTIB, another group that is involved in transit, in order for that to occur. But just remember, people that live in greater Minnesota do go to Minneapolis-St. Paul, and they do pay sales tax, they do pay other things, so it does impact everybody around us as well. So I think it's important for us just to remember that we haven't had a fare box increase in all that length of time. To me, that doesn't show very good long-term effectiveness in management. And so I think there's some great concerns there that we want to, I think, at least explore.
So Representative Petersburg, if we were able to strip away some of these governance issues and some of these other things that I think is, for most people, kind of inside baseball. I mean, it's important policy and for sure, but if we were able to resolve those and strip those away, and the question was, can we move forward on Southwest Light Rail so it doesn't shipwreck the transportation discussion, it doesn't shipwreck the bonding bill, it doesn't shipwreck the tax bill? Is that something that you as a rural legislator could support?
I've always been very cautious about, without seeing something in front of me saying that, yes, this will work and this won't work. So I'd like to see the language. But with all of the safeguards that are for the state, all of the safeguards that we have for various counties within the 7 metro county area, not only Hennepin County, but also Scott County and Carver County, which are not as enamored with it, and even those up in north, if all of those things were taken into consideration, we would be silly not to look at those options. And so I think I am always one to listen, to hear what's going on, and then make those decisions. But there are a lot of ifs in that statement that you just gave me.
So Representative Johnson, as an observer and participant in the process, do you think that this is an intractable issue, that if we don't settle the transit issue, we're not going to settle the roads and bridges issue?
I will say, I'll frame that a little differently. Transportation is not an intractable issue. Other states, South Dakota, Iowa just raised their gas taxes. Other states are doing things. The recognition, the need is common. When I'm knocking a lot of doors these days, I ask the question, what's the most important issue we should focus on moving forward? The two things I hear is, number one, transportation. The second thing I hear is got to get your job done. And I think they're really interlinked. I'm not so sure what we can accomplish in the special session. Okay, I'd rather look further ahead. But there's no doubt in my mind, especially if we can achieve the majority in the House and the Senate with Governor Dayton, that we can come up with a good transportation, a long-term dedicated transportation plan in this next session that comes. I think there's a clear commitment to do that, and we can do that. And I am one who argues for a one-state solution. I agree with Senator Dibble. I think we need an excellent transit system in the metropolitan area. We need a strong metropolitan area. Folks, I'm looking at people who manage and work and are associated with cities that receive local government aid. Local government aid fundamentally comes to your cities because of the high property values in that dynamic metropolitan area north of us. I live in North Mankato. The business that's done between North Mankato, New Ulm, I'm looking at New Ulm, and my region is very significant with the metropolitan area. There's trucks running back and forth right now. I'm looking at members of the 169 Coalition. That's a coalition that's a rural-urban coalition. Minnesota's best when we do it together. And this business, and I am not interested in getting in the business of saying, oh, we only do roads because we don't want a railroad or we don't want the way they transport themselves in the Twin Cities. I just think that's a mistake. Furthermore, I would even take it another step further. If we can help develop a good transit system in the metropolitan area that meets Senator Chamberlain's needs, and there's some real bus needs there, but also the train needs in that city to make it like the competitor cities, that also sets us up into play to say that we also have to have that investment in rural Minnesota to complete Highway 14, to complete Highway 23, to maintain our city roads, our county roads, and our township roads. And that's fundamentally the agreement that we need to seek to get. And I don't think we benefit ourselves long-term when we fight amongst ourselves. There's no reason we can't make that sort of investment. This is a dynamic state. We've got a lot going for ourselves. It's past time to invest in our transportation system, and we need to do that on a statewide basis.
So Senator Chamberlain, you got my view. My guess is he's got something he wants to...
Just 30 seconds, thank you. We don't live in a bubble, right? If we build hundreds of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions and billions of dollars of trains, believe me, at some point, all of us are paying for that because it's not sustainable. So, I caution against this rural-urban split people seem to want to do all the time. So, again, it's a fallacy. But hundreds and millions of billions of dollars for capital costs and then for continued operations. This comes from somewhere, either more taxes in the metro area or general fund money to pay off bonds, right? Look, we can move forward with the transportation plan. It's simple. The light rail in the Southwest corridor is controversial. That's something that is very red light, right? Take it off the table. Take what we have, take the package we have. We can agree on getting to $600 million at least for a short period of time. Why not take that and put that other one off to the side and say, look, we just can't find agreement on it. That's not going to work. So let's take what we can cobble together here, some one-time money, some bonding, and then this allocation of sales tax. Voila! It's right there. It's written up, ready to sign, ready to go. So we're open to ideas, but why not just take the controversial thing away and we can continue? So that is a big question. Thank you for the extra time.
I'd like to see if our audience has any questions here for a couple of minutes, if you guys are amenable to that. And then I've got a final question for all of you. Rick.
Well, I'm puzzled by the 600 million because The Minnesota Transportation Finance Advisory Committee, convened by the governor in 2012, concluded that the state has a $21 billion shortfall in transportation funding over the next 20 years. If we all agree that it's $600 million a year, that only adds up to $12 billion in 20 years. So is that, where does the math fit? That's $8 billion, $9 billion different.
So the question basically is are we even talking about the right amount of money when we talk about $600 million, or is it really more?
$600 million
A
is
year, yeah.
significantly less than advised by the Transportation Finance Advisory Committee, even just going into the highways or tax distribution. The number you're talking about are all the things that would need to be funded to a certain level
Just to
in order.
maintain.
No, the 21 is not just to maintain, but to build a world-class system, an economically competitive system. And that would include generating more dollars than I think we could really come up with to support municipal roadway system outside of the municipal state aid system, the county road system outside of the county state aid highway system, supporting townships, ports, et cetera, as well as putting significantly more dollars above $600 million, just $600 million. It was just $600 million into making sure that $600 million could flow out of the formula just to support the trunk highway system and not the CASA and the MSA system. So the $600 million is kind of the compromise dollar that is very minimum, that would be of shorter duration, like a 10-year plan that MnDOT has indicated, flowing just into the trunk highway user fund that MnDOT could live with to develop a 10-year program to start getting us on the path to creating that economically competitive system. And it leaves aside the transit discussion and the local roads discussion.
Representative Petersburg, you wanted to respond?
Yes, I was going to say, the original plan that came out in 2012, around that time, said that for 20 years we needed between 12 and 14 billion dollars in order to maintain and be competitive with our surrounding states. It was then revamped about a year later to that $21 billion in order to be state-of-the-art and world-class. So that's kind of where the difference there. And that was based upon a lot of the information that was given by the Department of Transportation and others, and a lot of assumptions that were there. So we had to, when we started determining what the size is, and I know Senator Dibble and Chair Kelly were involved with that a lot, coming up with what we thought was a fairly reasonable amount and something that was accomplished, and we came across $600 million. Governor seemed to be okay with that as well. So that's what we came up with.
Other questions? Yeah, Karen.
There were, it's my understanding there were some earmarks for specific transportation items in the bill. The governor and MnDOT don't particularly like specific earmarks. I wonder if the panel can comment on if we have a special session, do they think the earmarks will stay or will the governor away? Quick answer.
Who wants to take that?
So the question is about some earmarks that showed up in the bonding bill, kind of under the cover of darkness, and kind of scudded over to the Senate without really any disclosure or discussion. That really doesn't have much to do with this discussion around trying to pass a comprehensive transportation bill that's sustainable, long-term, multimodal, serves everyone in every corner of the state. This has to do with, what is the bare minimum we can do with $300 million in cash and kind of head home.
Do you think that it'll stay in the bill if there's
I don't know. I'll just say this as a matter of principle. I think it would be fine to maybe enumerate some priority projects, identify a bucket of money, whether those are trunk highway dollars or just general fund appropriations, identify some eligible projects for those dollars, but to specifically earmark road and bridge projects and specific dollar amounts, et cetera, is a really, really bad idea, a very bad precedent to start setting for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is then any of you who are represented by weak legislators will never get another road built in your district ever. We might as well fold up the transportation committee and just put just enumerate road projects in the bonding bill and just duke it out and do the horse trading on everyone's pet road project. And we might as well not even have a planning staff or engineers. We can just do it all at the legislature.
Agreement. Yeah, Representative Petersburg.
Okay, so I was one of them that kind of pushed for this. As a matter of fact, I was helping put together the package. The question came is that the day before the last day of session, it was evident that we weren't going to be able to get a transportation package done. That left about $300 million worth of cash on the bottom line. And so I spoke and said, hey, let's put some projects out there that was well balanced across the state, whether or not people thought it was well balanced or not, and send it to Senator Bach and see what they thought. And so that was given to Speaker Dowd, and he had conversations with Senator Bach. And I agree with Senator Dibble. That's not the way we should be doing it with earmarks. But the reality is that we've had some legislative auditor very much big concerns about how the Department of Transportation picks its projects and whether it's even following some procedures and policies that it had in place. We do need to work on that. And so we have some concerns about how they pick this. And if nothing else, I think this just brings to attention some of the key projects that are out there that have very much passion behind them in various areas of the state that the department is just kind of leaving behind. So whether, I mean, it was, in my opinion, it was kind of a long shot, but it was at least using up the dollars that we had, because unless we invest it, it's just going to sit there, and at least we could get out some projects done. But no, I'd rather go through the process itself, and but that $300 million is still going to be there. That's outside of bonding proposal.
All right, so final question here. Our hour is about up for each of you. We'll start with Senator Chamberlain. It's two questions. It's a two-part question, and if you're efficient, could be answered with 2 words. One, is there going to be a special session? And 2, will it address transportation in any significant way?
No. And the second part of your question is it's moot.
All right.
Right? So no, there's just,
Okay.
there are no people out there at the doors at Market Fest and the parade saying, I want more road construction. There's nobody out there worried about it. So this isn't impacting people on a daily basis. It will not be a special session.
Not even for other issues? I mean, your constituents are saying that it's, okay. Senator Dibble.
I think there will be, yes, and depends on what you mean by a significant, dealing with transportation in a significant way. By my definition, I would say no.
Okay. Bentley?
I think we at the chamber are cautiously optimistic on both fronts, I guess. I mean, we still believe that there is a unique opportunity here to not just have a special session, but get a tax, bonding, and transportation bill done. We think Senator Dibble and Representative Kelly did a lot of good work in the closing days of session that really provided a path to get there. So,
All right. Representative Johnson.
I do think there will be a special session, and I don't think what we will do on transportation will be of any great significance because, again, it's not a long-term sustainable development, and I don't think we can achieve that. On the other hand, I think there can be money for the corridors of commerce, and there should be money for corridors of commerce, and can be some sort of a resolution for the light rail transit as well.
Representative Petersburg.
Well, right now, I think it's about 50-50, and if we could get things that are outside of what the governor wants to do, which he wants to spend it all on other things, I think we have a potential of putting some dollars in transportation, maybe not specifically, but in general else. Sometimes it seems like we go really slow here at the Capitol, and sometimes that's at your benefit for us to do that. And if I could leave you with one comment, the question is, so we have this snail, and he's riding on the back of a turtle. What does he say? Wee! That's right.
All right. Thank you guys for coming. We really appreciate your time this afternoon.